Greetings, everybody, and welcome to Not Funny Politics Present Andor Season 1 Rewatch. So, last time we covered the first 3 episodes collectively. Now we're going to start covering them individually, but the nice part is that over the course of the week we're going to be doing this, we'll kind of be covering like an arc at a time, and so we're now kind of entered Andor's new arc. His sort of first, he's now in separation from, if we think back to what we talked about last time about the hero's journey. I'll talk about it again when we kind of get to the end of this cycle, but we're in this part where he's in the initiation separation. He has moved beyond the world he is used to and the life he's used to, and out into this, as Obi-Wan Kenobi would say, larger universe. So this episode is episode 4, Aldhani, originally aired on September 28, 2022, written by Dan Gilroy and directed by Susanna White. So Luthen takes Cassian around with him and to a planet called Aldhani, asking him to join in on basically a heist robbery. Cassian is kind of reluctant, but eventually agrees. Luthen kind of talks him into it. He asks him to use a pseudonym when he's among the rebels, and he chooses Clem, which is actually his adopted father's name. They meet Vel, who is the rebel group leader, introduces him and then she takes him and they go back to camp. They have to walk quite a distance, and during that time we find out that Aldhani is itself not exactly necessarily like a super important planet, but like Ferrix, it's kind of like one of those planets that's not necessarily super important in any major way, but it's situated in a position to expand to other places, very much like Ferrix. He gets introduced to the rest of the team. Meanwhile, all along this whole way, Luthen is not revealed to be part of this. Everything about his involvement is kept super secret. So they explained that Cassian was always part of the plan for stealing the payroll of an Imperial sector there. He's their redundancy. And they're taking advantage of this very natural phenomenon called the Eye of Aldhani, or I think that's what it's called, to escape as part of their getaway. Meanwhile, on Coruscant, Luthen goes back to his sort of new old life of pretending to be an antiques dealer. Meets up with Senator Mon Mothma, who also is back and introduced to us again. We previously saw her in Rogue One, and if you watched the cartoon Rebels, you saw her there too. We're getting closer to her becoming that version of the character. But now at this point, we're meeting her as a very sort of tenuous senator trying to navigate slowly, basically acting as a money person. She's keeping the whole, they go to discuss what's going on with the Empire, but it's all under the cover of she's there to buy a present for her husband. Cyril and everybody else at Frank's Prelox Morlana gets fired when the ISB officially takes over. We also meet members of the ISB, including Bevlin and Major Partagast, and we beat the more important one, Lieutenant Deidre Miro, who is seeking access to the Ferric incidents because she thinks it's connected to one of hers, and she's a very dogged person. And of course, Cyril Karn, after getting fired, has to come back now and live with his mother. Poor guy. Not really. All right. So we get this sort of... one of the things I want to point out is that one of the things that was pointed out to me is that if you watch the opening credit sequence, the title card sequence of Andor, for every episode, something musically keeps continuing to get added. And it gets really noticeable in episode 4 that we've added some instruments to this sort of overall thing. So keep an eye out for that as we watch along. Cassian identifies that Luthen's ship that he uses is called a Fondor Hullcraft. It's interesting because this isn't apparently just a normal one either. He basically notices there's something special about this ship. It's obviously being modified and kitted out for sure. And I honestly think it's one of the coolest ships I've ever seen. I used to think the Millennium Falcon was the coolest ship. Millennium Falcon is a close second, but this might be the coolest ship. And whatever Luthen did to it. So, like I said, when Luthen is trying to convince Andor to come along with him, he starts naming off, shall we say, separatist groups who are in conflict with the Empire. Partisan Front, the Alliance, guerrillas, separatists. And Luthen says, isn't it all the same? And Andor basically kind of agrees with him. and he kind of sees as pointless and fruitless at this point. So he's not a rebel yet. He's a rebellious person, but he's not a believer yet. He's very much a mercenary, and that's kind of how he's going to be characterized on Aldhani. He does mention that he served on Mimbam for 6 months, and he was there basically saying that we were fighting each other. Interestingly enough, this does connect to Han Solo, as seen in the Solo movie about his early life. He was on Mimbam too. In fact, he got off because he met Tobias Beckett, and that's where he also met Chewbacca, and he left with them to go do the raid that starts his whole adventures off in a different place. Interestingly enough, Cassian was only there, like I said, for 6 months, and he was a cook. And the reason he didn't die there is because when the bad stuff went down and everybody else got killed, he ran. So, strong survival instinct. And Luthen finally puts this to him. He said, wouldn't you rather give it all once for something real? Because the whole Mimbam discussion that Cassian is putting forward is designed to kind of serve as, what's the point of fighting? Run away, survive. And this is still basically a core tenet of the nature of a Cassian himself, is when the shit hits the fan, survive, get away. Okay, he's got a very strong survival instinct. But this line here kind of convinces him to give it a shot. So they're dropping him onto this team in Aldhani for the heist. Like I said, he chooses to use his father's name, Clem, as his name. We then, of course, while this is happening, and we're going to introduce those people back on Coruscant, we find Dedra Meero of the ISB, which is the Imperial Security Bureau. We find her going to work. We get to see the building. And when they're inside, we get Major Partaghast giving this whole speech about what the ISD is. And people give various answers. And I think, is it Dedra who might have given him a textbook answer? He says, no, we're healthcare. Their job is to root out the problems before they become problematic and take care of them, to keep the Empire as an entity kind of healthy and alive, which I think is an interesting thing. You might recognize Major Partaghast as being Qyburn from the Game of Thrones series. He's a British actor. I've seen him in so many things. I love him. He's a good actor. Always plays a very steely-eyed kind of, you want to like him, but you know you shouldn't kind of like him bad guy type. Now they are hearing these reports about Ferrix and the Starpath unit, and this catches Meero's attention. And she starts investigating the event on Ferrix very doggedly, because the Starpath unit was stolen from a place, Stirgar, which was in her jurisdiction. She wants charge over this. She's very gung-ho, and she's obviously quite new at the ISB too. And this ends up leaving her to clash with Blevin, who is in charge of the Ferrix sector. Blevin and Meero basically bump heads, and they end up hashing it out in front of Major Partaghast. Dedra keeps wanting to see things, that there's a larger picture, but she's being ignored and overlooked. Strangely enough, she's quite right. Luthen would probably want to get rid of her too. Interestingly enough, Partaghast manages to defuse the situation temporarily, but Meero obviously is not going to let it go, and this is part of her arc through this season. Now the Empire has decided to move in and take over Prelox Morlana's materials. Cyril and everybody else gets fired. There's a really kind of embarrassing stare down where Chief Hynes basically tries to say, I didn't do this. Of course, Inspector Blevin is there taking the whole thing rather personally. He's, like I said, the sector oversight, and basically their authority over Morlana 1 and all that area is over now. When back with Cassian and Luthen, when they land on the planet, Luthen gives him a blue Kyber, a sky stone, to Cassian as a down payment for his services, but he says he wants it back. I believe in a lot of ways he's trying to sort of coax Andor to kind of buy him into going along with these things. It's like an insurance policy, I think, in a lot of ways, and particularly the idea that he wants it back. And of course, we meet Vel, who's leader of this mission. She's very restless, kind of mad about this addition of Clem to the team. But again, the whole argument here we're going with is that he's mercenary. He's also, in the way Vel and Luthen talk about, disposable. There's a very cold, ruthless life going on in this element of the rebellion here. And of course, this is when he finally learns that there's an Imperial garrison. He gets a little PO'd about it. But when we finally get back to his group where they meet, we meet the rest of the team. We meet Skeen, who's played by Ebon Moss Bachrach, who's about to become the Thing in Fantastic Four movies. I think he also stars in the The Bear. That's the show. Not really watched that show, but I should probably. We have meet Tamarin. He's an ex-Imperial officer. Interesting guy. I'm a big fan of Nemik. He is the idealist. He's writing a manifesto. I really love his character. Something about him I just really thought was kind of touching. But it's nice to see this whole group. Everybody's a little different. And then we have Cinta, another female of the group. We'll learn more about her. But she seems very cold, very single-minded. And they're not thrilled about this whole initiative. And, of course, Vel lies to them. She has to sort of reassert herself as leadership. And then finally, the last member of the team, Lieutenant Gorn, who's actually a member of the garrison who's turning on them. He's not happy about it. No one's happy about it, but they kind of work it out. Clem gets a debrief about the whole situation where they explain the whole rundown and that there's this Eye of Aldhani. Happens every 3 years. It's a meteor. It's not really a meteor shower. They try to describe it as a meteor shower, but it's something else. And that's their ticket out. And that Nemik, one of the other reasons that he is sort of calculated escape trajectory through the eye. So that's their way out. They're going to use the rail ship out the door. And before the nearby fighter base can dispatch ships to kill them, they plan to ride the eye out of the system. So Clem is given a bunch of homework to study from Tamarin, and then he has to learn everything by morning. We have Luthen, who has now returned to Coruscant. We finally really get to see his antique dealer alter ego up close. He puts on like basically a wig and all these jewelry and this different outfit. He starts pretending, he does these poses to sort of reemerge into this character, because you can sort of get the idea that the antique dealer version we see is not the real him, but he has to sort of get into character. And then, of course, we have his meeting with Mon Mothma, who comes to his antique shop. We also meet his assistant, Clea. Now, their whole pretend thing to have this get a birthday gift for her husband, but they're secretly talking espionage and how she's trying to find ways to get money to him and how she's running into further troubles. This is part of the arc she'll have to do with here. And one of the things she mentions is that there are new faces everywhere, and she basically assumes they're spies. And so Mon Mothma is going to recruit an old friend to help with the funding. This will come later. We'll meet him soon. Of course, while this is happening, Clea is distracting Mon Mothma's driver, who she's pretty certain, and they're pretty certain is an ISB plant. Of course, Cyril, who has now lost his job, ends up also on Coruscant. Everything, and one thing I think is interesting about Coruscant is that everything about Coruscant is, since it's a citywide planet, is the further you are up is a sign of how rich you are. The further you go down is a sign of how poor you are. So when you sort of see where Cyril lives and where his mother lives, it's in a position where you get some daylight, but not a lot of it, which I kind of sort of associate that maybe he's like lower middle class, is what I kind of get a feeling. I'm guessing, of course. We meet his mother, Edie, very overbearing, Edie Karn, played by the brilliant Catherine Hunter. I love her. She's very domineering, but an interesting character. Mon Mothma, of course, goes home after her meeting with Luthen. We meet her husband, Perrin, who's prepping a dinner party. They have an arranged marriage, so they're not exactly they're not in love with each other. It's just an arranged marriage. He's invited basically people politically who have undermined Mon Mothma, particularly with the Scorn situation. But she kind of just rolls with it and everything like that. And of course, this is where we leave things, because we're not yet there to the heist, but like I said, we're building to the heist. So next time we will be looking at episode 5, The Axe Forgets. And that's where we'll pick up next time. So in the meantime, do all those fun things, like, subscribe, comment, share, help us out. Check out the podcast over on Not Funny Guys Presents Off the Reels. Like I said, we're still in the middle of our Rambo run. That won't last very long, and I'm sure we'll be moving on to some fun things. I think Casey's going to be picking next. Who knows? I don't know. But I do know that we are planning a special episode. We did not cover Captain America 4, but we are planning on doing a special episode covering both that and Thunderbolts after it comes out next month. So keep an eye out for that. So in the meantime, stay safe out there, and remember, be vigilant, keep your eyes open, but don't tell the ISB anything.
Say not funny guys again?
Not funny guys again!
No, can you say not funny guys?